And that's why I believe in you, because that is the greatest purpose. It's to love. Honest. It sounds corny, whatever you want to say. I don't care. I love people because there is freedom and power in loving people.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we have the crazy belief that creating success and happiness is a daily conscious effort, which is why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week. I'm your host, Brandon Beecham, and each and every Wednesday, you can tune in to hear me interview a different consciousness changemaker that is out there working tirelessly to help catalyze change and expand awareness all across Spaceship Earth. On the other 4 weekdays, you can tune in to myself and my co-host, Dalian, giving interpretations of our favorite thought-provoking quotes, sharing a bit of inspiring or mysterious news, taking questions from the audience, and digging into any other mind-expansive topics that will help keep your soul fed by tuning you into positive vibrations on a regular basis. And you guys have heard me say that if I ever run ads on the show, it will only be with a company that I fully support because I believe their intention is to make a positive difference in the world. Well, I'm pleased to announce that day has arrived and that this episode of the Positive Head Podcast is being brought to you thanks to the support of Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. All right, all you positive heads, on this week's interview episode, I have a guest here with me that is sure to help energize and align your mind, body, and soul. I have none other than Richard Gordon on the show, and Richard is the founder of the revolutionary healing modality, Quantum Touch. Hello there, Richard. Welcome to the show.
Oh, Brandon, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's definitely a pleasure to have you. The work that you're doing is so fascinating and interesting, and I can't wait to dive right in. And in the spirit of that, first question I like to always open up with. You're in an elevator. You've got 10 floors to answer. The gal next to you looks over and says, "What's your passion?" What do you say?
Wow. The passion is discovering the possibilities of what it means to be human and beyond.
I like that. It makes me want to spin another 10 floors to see what comes next.
Well, that's the idea, is that we don't know the limits.
Exactly. So let's start with how you got into the line of work that you're into. Quantum touch, which is, is a very interesting healing modality. But let's start. Why don't you share a little bit of your history? I know as a young man, you recognize yourself, I guess, as a non-theist. Can you tell us about that?
When I was in college, I just never liked the idea of religion very much because of the contradictions and the hypocrisy that was going on.
Sure.
And I grew up in a household of atheists, but I didn't feel that was an appropriate position, so I decided that I was a non-theist. In other words, I had no interest in the subject whatsoever. And if God knocks on my door, I'll pay attention and say hello. But other than that, I really didn't feel like that was something I was going to be interested or pursue. Little did I know that my whole life would be centered around spirituality.
Yeah, wow. And you had a series of synchronicities, which we are very, interested in on the show. And you can, and we'll get into some of those stories later in the show, but you did have a little synchronicity that led to your change in perspective, right?
I had a lot of them, a lot of awakenings. I mean, things that were just like outside the box kind of awakenings. The first wasn't as, the kind that you're really going to be excited about. I went to a doctor because I had a lot of problems, intestinal problems, skin problems, lung problems, etc. And he said, well, yeah, you got a lot going on, but let's wait till you get worse, and then we'll figure out something to do for you. And I was properly insulted. Let's wait till your engine explodes before we change the oil.
Yeah, exactly.
So I went to a holistic health school, and it was called the Cristo School of Natural Healing and Herbal Medicine. And there I got in touch with something called polarity therapy. And that was back in about 1975. So I've been doing this stuff for a while.
About the year. I was born in 74, so I was a year old.
Yeah, well, you were just getting started. Well, I was blown away by what that work was about, the polarity therapy, and I ended up writing a book about it and saw incredible miracles happening with the work. But then everything was about to change and get up-leveled again. I went to a seminar in the summer of 78, a few months before my book came out. And I met a man named Robert Rasmussen. And this guy was this obese, 50-year-old man, blasé, telling tall tales, and I couldn't believe anything he said. And he was talking about, well, yeah, there was the time the tumor was the size of a grapefruit and it melted away in an hour. And then there was the time, I just touched the kidney stones and they dissolved under my fingertips. And there was the time the child broke his leg and the next day he was running around the swimming pool. And I mean, the bone was sticking out of the flesh and you could actually watch it go back in. He was just crazy talk. And then he said, oh yeah, I just touch people and the bones move back into alignment. And then my girlfriend gets up at the front of the room, excuse me, and she has a major scoliosis. And he just touches the occiput and it rolls back into alignment. And he touches her hips and they just, before my eyes, I'm sitting 5 feet away, and they roll back into alignment. He goes up and down her spine. And in about 6 or 7 minutes, her spine is almost completely straight. I was floored. I couldn't believe my eyes.
You think?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was the very beginning. That was the opening chapter. By then, I lost interest in my first book, Your Healing Hands, which is like in 11 languages and a bestseller throughout the 1980s. And I lost interest in it because I learned that we could use breathing and body awareness to raise our own vibration and be able to access healing energy so powerfully that you can see things happen that have not been noted by medical authorities.
Wow. That's absolutely a fascinating account. And you could literally see the bones, spontaneously starting to move is what I read one account. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. You can do it all the time. In fact, when I was on the road teaching endless workshops around the country and the world, and I was also giving endless lectures, I would guarantee people at the lecture that with a light touch, before lunch break on the first day, everybody's going to be able to see bones move into place or their money back. And no one ever got a refund. Everybody succeeded. And that's just the tip of the iceberg on the kinds of new human abilities that we're discovering.
Yeah. That is absolutely fascinating. And, as far as, so your work now, quantumtouch.com is your website, correct?
Yeah.
What exactly do you do there? What is the premise?
We've got a lot of activities going on, but one of them is we start people and show them how to use breathing and body awarenesses to raise their own vibration. The idea of healing, of energy healing, is it's all about resonance and entrainment. In other words, if you hold a really high vibration and you keep raising your vibration throughout the session, anybody in your field is going to have to match you. You never want to come down and match them to become tired and drained, or feel sick for that matter. You want to keep raising your vibration to let them come up. So what we do is we have books, videos, online. We got an online workshop. We've got live instructors teaching in about 30 or 40 countries around the world. And that's just the starting point of teaching people how to raise their vibration to be able to assist other people at accelerating the healing process. Then, we can talk about this later, but I've discovered an entirely second modality because energy healing is not perfect. It's only going to work about 85% of the time, maybe 90%, at relieving symptoms. But there will be those people who will not be moved by the energy work. And in those cases, I found an entirely new system. I called it self-created health, to help people find and release the emotional causes of why they're creating that condition. And when they do, and they go through all the 7 steps, not only do their symptoms disappear, but they can feel incredibly grateful for having had the condition because it showed them how they had stopped loving. So we go through the quantum touch, and then there's a level 2 where we can do it 2 or 3 times faster without even touching people. So if you want to watch the bones move, that's just effortless now, without even touching people. And then now I'm working on a new book, and we can talk about this later if you like. And it's going to be called The Secret Nature of Matter, because I found a small window to understand how matter and consciousness intersect.
Wow, you are a fascinating individual to talk to, Richard, because all of this, and of course you have people who will say, this sounds like something out of a Harry Potter movie or something. Prove it. And you're saying, you can show evidence to pretty much anyone.
Well, there's never been a double-blind study proving that door locks, the keys open door locks. It's never been published. It's never been done. There's never been a double-blind, placebo-controlled, published study saying that you can see the moon at night by looking at it. But what I have is so blatantly obvious that anybody willing to look will see it. But I imagine when Galileo was around, he encountered 3 kinds of skeptics. There were those who knew better than to look through his telescope. There were the ones who would look and say, well, it works great during the day, but it obviously doesn't work at night. And those were the rationalists. They would rationalize what happened. And the skeptic of the 3rd kind, or a close encounter of the 3rd kind, would say, wow, let me look again. And why do you think this works? And explain to me about this optics thing you're telling me. And how do I get my own? They're the ones who are willing to get their hands dirty, so to speak, and to examine and explore what was actually there. But most skeptics like to feel smug, and they'll simply run away. And I've had some hilarious experiences where skeptics run away after I show them something they know is impossible.
Wow. They're just like, okay, this totally dissolves my whole perception of reality. I'm out.
I'll tell you one story like that. I was at a conference called Science of Consciousness Conference, and most of the people there were interested to see if they could build an artificial brain. They weren't really interested to know what consciousness was.
Right.
And I met this one guy who, I had a sign up there, and the sign said, consciousness affects matter, free demo. And he's got his arms crossed and his head cocked, and he looks at me and he says, all right, what do you got? And I said, well, I'm going to demonstrate that I can untwist your occipital torsion and your pelvic torsion without touching you. He said, well, that's impossible. I said, great, hold that thought. So I measure him and I said, oh my God, you're further out of alignment than almost anybody I've ever met in my life.
Wow.
And I said, so to make it hard, why don't you kind of lock your hips? So I meditate for 4 or 5 seconds and I measure him again and say, oh, look, you're completely level now. And he said, well, of course, you used reverse psychology on me. And I asked him a very rude question. I said, well, do you consider yourself an empirical scientist or faith-based? He said, well, empirical, of course. I said, great. Then let's go around and you can watch me do this 8 or 10 more times and see if I'm using reverse psychology. Well, he knew he was cornered at that point, and he said, well, if I let myself believe this actually happened, everything I know about science would fall like a house of cards. And I said, well, as an empirical scientist, don't you want to let the cards fall where they will?
Yeah.
And he thought for a moment, and he said, not today. And he just walked away.
Wow. Isn't that a trip? Let me ask you this. How long for someone who is very interested in learning these techniques, how long is that process to learn? Is this something that people can teach themselves? Is it something,
Yeah, this is, it's like, well, the best place to hide something is in plain sight. Right.
Right.
Where are my glasses? Right. Well, they're on your head. It's like, can't find them.
Right,
well, this is one of those plain sight things. It is probably the easiest skill there is to learn. But everybody asks me how this compares to Reiki. And there's
great question.
There's a lot of fundamental differences with the difference between this and Reiki. Primarily, we have no attunements and no symbols. And we use breathing and body awareness to raise our vibration. So it's work. We're not waiting for the energy to happen. We're building the energy and amplifying it constantly. And then we're using what we call the where does it hurt technique, which is complicated. You ask a person where it hurts and you sandwich it between your hands.
Very high tech, Richard. Very high tech.
Yeah, well, like that's my thing. It's like, how do we get to the bottom line of everything? How do we find what's actually true? So if people want to learn this, they can watch a video online. My business partner called it the quantum energy system. And it's a complete weekend workshop that you can watch with your friends. And then we have a lot of instructors around the world teaching workshops. We've got practitioners in over 50 countries if people want to get sessions.
Is that something that is the quantum energy system online workshop? Is that something that people buy through your site? That's something that's free online?
Yeah, they can buy it. I think it's
gotcha.
like $97 or something. And it's a complete weekend workshop. And they can watch it with their friends. In fact, I really encourage you to invite all your friends. If they all chip in $20, you know, it's not a big deal. But my friend Deborah, this was a wild story. If you like wild stories, and I know you do, she was a scientist, practicing scientist, and she was driving into London before the sun rose. And some lorry, as they called them back there, was across both lanes of the highway without lights on. And before she could hit the brakes, she smashed into it going about 60 miles an hour. And 3 or 4 cars smashed into the back of her car. Her car caught fire, and some angel somehow pulled her out of the car before it exploded. She was laying on the side of the road, and 7 years later, fast forward, has no money, no boyfriend, no job. The doctors tell her she's going to be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. She can't turn her head, and she's getting these extremely painful injections into her neck that aren't doing any good whatsoever. She goes into a metaphysical bookshop, and they just received my video on, the basic video workshop of quantum touch. And she says, well, what do you have with essential oils? Will that help me? And they said, no, I think you'd better come to this workshop. So they showed the workshop to a group of people. The first practice session that one of the people gave her took away 90% of her pain.
Wow.
And gave her 90% of her mobility back. She went back to her doctor, who didn't want to hear about it, and told her to go away, and that she'd be coming back begging for injections again, and she never has. Since then, she's gone on to become an instructor of the level 1 and level 2 work, and has taken my work around the world. And it's one of the most amazing stories. But she is, her name is Deborah Gare, and if anybody wants an amazing session, she's one of the best. But there's many best out there, but she's one of them.
Wow. And she was in a wheelchair for 7 years?
No, she was soon to be confined to a wheelchair. She was still walking around, but barely.
I see.
I see. You just have to get used to it, they told her. You'll never turn your head. You'll be in a wheelchair the rest of your life, so stop fighting it, right?
Yeah. Wow. Very, very fascinating. And the workshop that got her started was the quantum energy system workshop that you're talking about, or something comparable.
Yeah, it's the basic quantum touch video workshop, which I recorded some time ago. And I had taught the workshop so many times, I anticipated all the questions. Because I used to have, for the last 15 workshops I taught, I had everybody write down every question that was asked in the room. And I found out that the only questions that were ever original were, what about working with type 2 diabetes? There are 50,000 human conditions, so there's a lot of questions you can ask about how it works with specific conditions.
Yeah, exactly.
I really answered all the questions on the video, so it's very complete.
Wow. And that is a great question. What sort of illnesses, does this work for? I mean, is there any...
It's a very difficult question because we've seen pretty much anything respond. We've had I just interviewed a couple of my instructors, and I found out it was working with mental health conditions, and I didn't even know that it did that. because I hadn't had the opportunities to work with mental health care patients. But they were telling me severe bipolar, addiction, trauma, ADD, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, many kinds of conditions that are affecting the brain can respond. We sincerely don't know the limits of what's possible.
Sure.
And that's one of the most exciting places to be in, where you see things happening that exceed your highest expectation. And by the way, that's my favorite definition for a miracle, is when something happens that exceeds your expectations.
Yeah, that's a great definition, actually. I think I'll borrow that. Thank you.
Yeah, and it works for parking places or for transcendence.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I'm very interested in the mental health aspect of it, because actually I have someone close to me who has some severe mental health issues, and actually my child's mother, she has. It's interesting, you know, we connected, you know, well, he's 17, so, you know, a long time ago, and the reason we connected, I was in a band called Kundalini at the time, and she was the first person that knew what it was when I was out handing out our little demo tape, you know, all those years ago, and going back to like
Italian sausage, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. It's a pasta, yeah, and so anyway, what was interesting with her is she you know, had told me that someone had said that her Kundalini was raised, and as a result, she had a bad scoliosis, curvature, you know, of the spine, and she had metal rods when she was a teenager put in her back to straighten her out. And I was talking to someone, and they said, "Oh, that can actually be a conductor of energy, you know, not necessarily in a good way." And here we are all these years later, and it's really a sad affair, because she's really lost touch with reality in a very, it's sort of like an awareness of the oneness of all things, but it's sort of like a spiritual narcissism. I'm the center of the universe, and you all, you know, are my servants. And it's a very bizarre, sad sort of thing. And so, of course, I'm always exploring new things, and I'm curious, is there anyone that can help her? Is there anyone that can help her? Because it's you know, this all started about 5 years ago, where it was a kind of a cheese slipping off the cracker completely sort of thing.
Oh, that's a tough situation.
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, of course, for my child, it's really tough. But, you know, he's so blessed in every aspect of his life, and that is sort of the cross to bear, I guess. And so I'm always curious in exploring, is there anything out there that can help someone who, you know, has this sort of mental illness that's sort of unexplainable, obviously sort of a spiritual calamity. And, you know, I had a reading from an Akashic Records reader, maybe a year or so ago, and Sue Krebs, who actually I interviewed, and she said, "What an interesting choice his soul made. You're two people who have taken the same sort of understanding, and one is very light with it, and one is went very dark." And of course, that's an interesting perspective, because that's exactly what it is. It's this very like dark kind of spiritual narcissism, and as I like to put it. And just curious if you think that the curvature of the spine or rods could have something to do with that, or
I'm a big believer in busting spiritual materialism. So I don't really believe the rods in the spine were the issue, but there is a lot of pain underneath narcissism.
Yeah.
And that pain has to be dealt with and confronted in a compassionate kind of way.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, it's possible that if your friend got quantum touch sessions, the level 2 work inside the brain, it might help her find some balance. I don't know if it would help, but some people find tremendous healing with a combination of MDMA and magic mushrooms.
Right.
And under the right therapeutic situation, that people can actually deal with stuff that can help them. But if the defensive systems are so built up and the person doesn't recognize that there's a problem,
exactly,
then they don't confront it. And that's really where it comes down. So sometimes, some deep interventions can be helpful, like psilocybin mushrooms can sometimes awaken a person.
Or ayahuasca, perhaps?
Perhaps ayahuasca.
Or iboga.
But a lot of times they have a lot of resistance to dealing with people who don't have any grip on reality. I think there's some fear that they could go off the deep end.
Yeah.
and if they do it. But I more of the caution to the wind approach myself, which is they already are off the deep end, and maybe
exactly. And in her case, it's definitely that. It's really sort of shocking to speak with her and frightening all at the same time. It's
Well, the better than ego can become an addiction. The self-importance, and the twin of self-importance is self-pity. And often you'll hear them both in the same sentence. Poor me. I'm the most important person in the world and nobody appreciates it.
Yeah.
And so that's both self-pity, self-importance joined together. And this is the core of negative ego. The negative ego plays with self-pity and self-importance. And that's its only game. But it's very clever. And we get seduced by that martyrhood or overt self-pity, as well as, look how special I am. And these games are totally destructive, but that's what gets played into.
Yeah. Yeah. And, in her case, and of course we'll move along, but I'm just very curious about this, and I'm sure it's interesting to the listener. So, in her case, it's like, any day now I'm moving back into the Vatican and getting my $1 trillion inheritance, and all you who ever resisted me will die a brutal death. And it's just like, where did this come from? Every movie is about her or her children, or everything is a reflection of, they're all talking about her, and it's just, it came 5 years or so ago. I mean, she's always a little questionable, but not like that, and it just all of a sudden there's a snap.
We have... in the my last book was called Quantum Touch 2.0, The New Human, where I outline a handful of new human abilities, and I have a chapter called Visible Magic, where that's where I show people how you can untwist somebody without touching them in a few seconds. But by applying those principles to working inside somebody's brain, we've seen crazy, remarkable things happening for people, and I don't know that she's a good candidate or a bad candidate. I have no idea. But
and do they have to be open to? Do you think someone can be helped like her? Who is? I mean, if you were to say you need help, she would laugh, and you don't know what you're talking about.
I don't think it's going to hurt. I mean, the way you work with somebody who hasn't asked for help is to connect with your higher self and ask to send the energy with harm to none. You could learn the work. You could imagine her head and mind, body, consciousness, and talk to it meditatively and send the heart energy, as we call it, into her. And you could do it on a regular basis, or you could do it for an hour, whatever you feel like. And you will have some impact. Whether or not her higher self wants to gain a sense of reality again is another question. But it wouldn't hurt, and it would certainly heal you in the process of giving.
Yeah, it could be a really good exercise for my son, a healing exercise for him, because, as I said, he's someone who just is so put together and just such a, pure, clear light, and has none of that sort of stuff, thank goodness. But, that's the hardest thing. Can you, imagine that? It's almost worse than seeing your mother die, seeing them slip into this, dark, reality that is self-created.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I keep, thinking about mushrooms again, because it tends to show a person what they're really doing.
Yeah.
But I also have heard for people with schizophrenia, they don't recommend it, but I suggested it to her. Right? Exactly.
I've suggested it to her a few times, that or ayahuasca or something, just to see, because in the past, many years ago, she has experimented, and this is going back, 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And I've suggested it maybe in the last year or so, because I don't talk to her often. Maybe every, couple months I'll get a crazy call from her. But, And I've, when I do suggest it, she's like, oh, well, that, all of reality, I don't need that. All of reality would melt if I did something like that. So I almost feel like there's, I don't know that she would be open to it. But I think that's an interesting thing I'm certainly intrigued to learn this myself. And my partner, Anna, actually happens to be in Hawaii right now, finishing up an energy healing, she's been doing an online course for going on, I think, a year and a half, and it's the completion of it right now in Hawaii with the woman who's been kind of the teacher. So I'm anxious to see. I'm sure she's probably familiar with your work and everything, and anxious to kind of turn my partner onto it as well. All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting this podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on the show Missing Links, the incredible researcher Greg Braden explores all the biggest questions concerning who we are, where we come from, where we're going, by connecting the missing links between science and spirituality to complete our understanding of humanity's history and to better understand the interconnectedness of all things. Awesome, right? And that's just one example. As you guys constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. There are, of course, stories like this out there, and one of them that I think of is a sort of a somewhat well-known figure, John of God. Are you familiar with him? I'm assuming so.
Yeah.
What is the work people like he's doing? Or, of course, there's the famous stories of characters like, Christ, Jesus. Are they all figures? Of course, John of God, for those of you who don't know, I think he's from Brazil and sort of a well-known healer, some pretty miraculous stories. These sound similar to the type of stuff that you've witnessed. Is he essentially just doing the same sort of thing, using the same sort of techniques, do you feel? And how about like figures like Christ?
Well, it's difficult to say, to say the least.
Yeah, right.
I haven't been.
You haven't interviewed them
to meet John of God, and I've heard some remarkable stories, some incredible stories actually, and yet I can tell you quite honestly, I've seen incredible things, and most of my students who have spent more than 20 or 30 hours doing sessions have seen some insanely extraordinary things as well. And I think there's also something about the placebo effect that the further you travel to see the saint, the greater the healing tends to be.
Interesting.
And so, if you go far enough, you may even experience more miraculous stuff. I actually saw a psychic surgeon as one of my developmental experiences that helped me break my spell of materialistic reality. When I was about 24, I had some real blood sugar issues. If I ate a handful of dates, I'd want to lay down and die.
Wow.
And 3 different friends told me about this guy, and his name was Reverend Plume, and he worked out of Seaside, California, and sometimes in Redwood City. And 3 friends who didn't know each other all told me about this guy, and I was still in my non-theist stage, and I thought, well, I trust coincidence. I trust the synchronicity.
Synchronicity, yeah.
Yeah, I said, okay, I'm getting a sign, so I'll just follow it and see what happens. And I went to see him. Took a long time before my appointment came up because he was really booked. And he just did everything to blow away all my spiritual materialism in one shot. He was, first thing he did was he prayed to Jesus before he put his hands inside my body. I later saw him put his hands inside the back of a woman's neck, and I was watching through an open door from about 5 feet away. I was completely blown away by it. He ate a bologna sandwich on white bread after the session was over.
What?
While his hands were inside me and I could see my guts through my shirt, he was telling a joke to his wife about a guy who walked into a bar carrying a pig under his arm.
What?
I'll tell you, every single.
Hold on. Let's back up here. He is sticking his hand straight into your gut, and you're seeing it.
Okay, here's how it actually came about. It was like, at first I thought he was playing a sleight of hand magic trick on me. That was my assumption. He wasn't. The law came down on him, so he wasn't allowed to touch people anymore. So what he did to get around the law was to put a piece of Kleenex over the part of your body he was going to touch.
Yeah.
So he puts a piece of Kleenex over my solar plexus, and then he takes two fingers. Well, first he kind of rested his head against his forehead against my chest, looking around. And his wife was this amazingly bright spirit, and she said, "Now you tell the Reverend what you think the matter with you is, but don't worry, he'll find out anyway." And so he's rolling his head back and forth as if he's looking inside my body with his forehead. And then he has his Kleenex on my solar plexus, and he suddenly plunges his hand forward, and I feel his knuckles kind of hit my solar plexus a little harder than I liked. And I figured, well, I heard the Kleenex rip, and I figured, well, he must have done a little trick where he slides his fingers down so I can't see them under his hand. He put his second hand in, and then he had another piece of Kleenex he had rolled up ahead of time into the shape of a large cigarette. And I saw it kind of get pushed straight into me. And then he's moving it around, and I'm seeing these reddish brown, wet looking guts right through my shirt. I went, what the fuck? And
oh my God.
Oh my God, I better trust this guy. Well, that's how it started. And then he just grabbed all the Kleenex and threw it in a wastebasket, and it didn't have any blood on it. I couldn't explain anything. But that evening I had pains going up and down my spine and going down my legs. And I never felt that before or after. It was just a weird sensation. And in the next 3 or 4 weeks, all my blood sugar problems just disappeared. And I went back to see him a second time. I don't even remember what for. But that was the time I watched him working on the back of a woman's neck. And another woman and I got permission to watch. The door was ajar by about 3 feet. He had his back mostly turned to us. And we watched, he was a small man with fat fingers. And I'm watching one finger go into the back of a woman's neck. Her hair was pulled up on top of her head. And I'm watching it sink in micro inch by micro inch straight into the back of her neck. And then I'm watching him put another finger in and then wiggling the fingers around almost aimlessly. And then when he pulls his fingers out, he pinches the skin together, and I see a line across the back of her neck about 1/4 of an inch wide, kind of red and almost bloody looking. And then he waves his hand over it a bunch of times, just really fast, moving it like 1/2 inch above the skin. And now we see a red bruise about the size of a $50. And then he rubs it with his hand, and the bruise is gone. And then I see him. He's not even aware we're looking. He's taking a deep breath, like that, like relieved, and he walks away. And this woman and I looked at each other and go, "Do you see what I see?" Yeah. We were blown away. And so I had all these experiences that helped me break my idea about spiritual materialism. And I wrote a whole chapter on it for my upcoming book. I'm working on a new book now. It's going to be called The Secret Nature of Matter. And I have a whole chapter on spiritual materialism and all the ways people try to take the physical of what they're working with now and try to make it into something spiritual. Like you've been in the groups where they say, now turn your left palm up and your right palm down, as if energy flowed in fluid dynamics like water with gravity. There's so many silly things that people do thinking that this is how energy works. Or even, not to make fun, but even the steel rod in the spine going to raise your kundalini, because the link between the spiritual and the metaphysical is not what people think it is. It's all about consciousness, and it's not about the matter. And I've made discoveries recently that every single kind of matter can hold consciousness. It is blowing me away, and I've done over 50 experiments, but I'll have to save that for another time. But when the book is ready to come out, we can or coming out, I'll talk to you again about it and go into
I'd love to go into that.
But I have discovered conscious entanglement. I've got a whole, like a 10 or 12 things about the lawfulness of matter and consciousness that I've discovered recently. And we're about to start doing some double-blind experiments with a UCLA scientist. So
wow.
This will nail it to the wall, so to speak.
Wow, that's fascinating. I have a question. I know of someone who was recently diagnosed with ALS that I'm connected to, and I'm curious if you've heard any kind of, obviously that's a terrible disease, if you've heard any kind of, or seen any kind of stories of helping with that.
Yeah, we've had quantum touch people who have helped with it. It's very deep, and once we've seen people respond very quickly, but they need a lot of sessions, and I don't think it's the final answer. But it's useful for helping to relieve symptoms, if even only temporarily. Now, there's so many different kinds of conditions, and it's pretty much across the board. We really don't know the limits of what's possible here. And the body heals itself. It's a basic principle. The body knows how to heal itself. And I had this big insight recently about placebos. You know, placebos, if you give a person a sugar pill, they may improve. But if you give them a sugar pill 3 times a day, they're going to get, it works even better than a sugar pill. And if you give them a sugar pill 3 times a day that's colored, that works even better. But if it's in an expensive looking package with a name brand on it, that works even better. But even better than that are sham hypodermic injections. And sham hypodermic injections don't work as well as sham surgery, where they just cut a person open and sew them back up. And they help people with knee problems and heart problems. They did instead of bypass their surgery. And they had the same results as actually doing the physical surgery. Just
cutting them open and sewing them back up.
Yeah. You can look up sham surgery and you can see a whole bunch of examples of that. But it's considered unethical for obvious reasons, because you're lying to people and deceiving them. And that's the problem with placebos. But the exciting thing is placebos will work about 1/3 of the time, and they work for pretty much everything. Everything seems to respond to placebos, but only about 1/3 of the time, and it requires dishonesty and deception. Well, it suddenly occurred to me that the body has another system. You know, we have the endocrine system and the circulatory system and the skeletal system and all the other systems in the body, but we have another system hiding in plain sight. This is the self-healing system. The body has an extraordinary ability to heal itself incredibly fast using the self-healing system, as demonstrated via the placebo effect. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Quantum touch is able to access the body's self-healing system probably about 85 to 90% of the time, but it does not require deception. We're doing the same thing. We're getting the body to stimulate its ability to heal itself rapidly, but we're not having to use deception.
Interesting. Yeah, you know, I've had that same thought, and even have said it probably in the last couple of months. Is I think when we die and cross over to the afterlife, we'll see that everything is a placebo, because it's all you're creating reality with beliefs, and it just seems to make for example, Dr. Bruce Lipton, who I'm sure you're familiar with, and I recently interviewed, biology of belief. It's like belief is creating reality. And so I'm very interested in your new book as well, and we'll definitely have to have you back on. But Secret Nature of Matter, I'm curious. You hear these stories of people, and this maybe is going there a little bit, but you hear stories of people physically manifesting things and so forth. Do you believe that sort of thing is possible? Just to give us a little glimpse.
My friend Deborah, who I mentioned earlier, who had that auto accident, she went to India, studied with some gurus, and while she was meditating, on different occasions, matter would suddenly appear. One time she was meditating with a group of people, and a bronze Buddha fell into the center of the room. It was about a 6-inch Buddha, and she kept it on a shelf, and then one day it just disappeared again. But she's had quite a number of objects spontaneously materialize and then eventually dematerialize. So
I've heard of these sorts of stories.
We think we know what this is about, but it's much deeper. Now, my own experiences with mushrooms have informed me that I've woken up in many other lifetimes, that the biggest cosmic joke is to forget who you are as a spiritual being. And I remember on 3 occasions laughing for 5 to 6 hours, screaming, howling, laughing, how funny it was to have forgotten who I am.
Right.
Because it's the biggest cosmic joke in the universe that here you are, the source of infinite love, and you forgot, and you thought you were Joe Schmo. And,
right.
And you believed it. You believed it so much that you were trying to convince everybody else that you're Joe Schmo. But you're actually this being of infinite compassion and love and oneness. And I remember in these experiences where I feel like I'm standing in front of Niagara Falls of infinite love, but my the receptacle, the container that I can hold that love in is like a shot glass. And that's my max. That's as much as I can handle right now of infinite love, is just the shot glass. And I'm screaming, howling, how funny it is that that's all I can receive, because that's just the limit of my nervous system at the moment to receive infinite oneness and connection to source. But we forget who we are, and we think we're these limited beings in these human bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite the revelation, and it seems like as people understand and wake up more and more, the limits of what is possible are being, broken down. It's sort of like the runners who couldn't break, what was it, the 4-minute mile, and then when someone did, everyone can do it, and it's kind of the same kind of thing with a lot of these sort of advancements that seem otherworldly or beyond, beyond what science holds true. And, speaking of, I think it is really interesting. I think I saw in one of your videos I was checking out where you talked about the TED Talk with Rupert Sheldrake that was actually banned because he was calling into question everything about science. And it's just, it's wild that we're still, there's so much resistance. I guess my question for you is do you think that resistance is slowly being broken down, and we'll see, what do you think it looks like, a decade or,
it is
50 years from now?
It is being broken down. The timeline on it is very hard for me to anticipate. I'm hoping, and by the way, I did get to meet Rupert Sheldrake when he came to California, and I got to show him and his wife what I was doing. And his wife, Jill, had her right hip about 4.5 to 5 inches higher than her left when measuring from behind. And I said to Jill, this looks like there's been a major injury here. And she said, yes, I had some fractured discs years ago. And I said to Rupert, who was measuring, he was on one knee, eyes level with his hands, and he goes, oh, it's very out. And I said, yeah. I said, I only predict this will go back about 75% of the way in the next 5 or 6 seconds. And Rupert looked at me, and I just meditated a few seconds, and then I said, measure now. And it went back from about 4.5 inches out to about 1/2 inch out.
Wow.
In those 5 or 6 seconds. And so the belief is going to change. The world will shift its beliefs. But one famous physicist had written that science changes one funeral at a time. One dead scientist goes at a time, and the bar changes. And I'm on a bleeding edge right now of stuff. And if I just walk up to people and tell them what I'm seeing and what I'm doing, I'm beginning to sound like a crackpot. I get it. Yeah. Because I'm so far out right now of where the consensus of reality is. Yeah. And yet, I came back recently from the University of Macau, where I gave a keynote address, and the University of Hong Kong, and in Tokyo on my last trip. And what I did as a simple demonstration is I got 20 people on stage, they measured them all, and then I pulled out I had them hold hands, and I pulled out a charged object from my pocket I meditated on for about 6 seconds, and I just touched a woman's hair at the beginning of the line, just for a split second, just tap, and all of them became untwisted instantly. We're
Wow.
dealing with a level of magic now that does sound a lot like Harry Potter. But
Yeah.
I'm only cracking the door open. I found a little window to look through to understand the reality a little more clearly, but I've only made it outside as far as the mailbox. I'm just getting started. We don't know where this thing is going to go, but ultimately, the insights are that we create our reality, that love actually has a real power, and that's what we're made of. We're made of the fabric of the all that is, of this infinite intelligence. And as we stop fighting it, and start opening to how deep does love go? How much power does love have? Go into that really deep, sincere part of yourself that knows that you're special, but not in a better than way. Special in the sense that you're part of the oneness, the infinite intelligence of the universe. We're all connected to Source. That's the specialness. And when you connect with that special part of who you really are, not who you think you are, then the sky's the limit. And we don't know where this is going. But people like you and Bruce and others and other podcasters, this is important information that people need to have to empower themselves, to wake up. And it's not just about, I need to learn it because I'm sick. No, we need to learn it to become well. We need to learn it to maximize our potential of spiritual development and to become all that we can be.
Yeah. Well said, Richard. It makes me think one of the things I started adopting 20 years ago, I just started saying, I don't believe in getting sick. And I'm not going to say I've never been sick, Richard, but I mean, 41 years old, haven't been to a hospital since the day I was born. I can count on, probably two hands the times I can remember throwing up. I don't, if I meet someone who has the flu, stay away, I've got the flu. I'll say, I don't believe in getting sick. I'll go hug them. I'll embrace them. I'll shake their hand. And it's, what am I doing in that moment? I'm creating that belief, not only bolstering that belief, not only in myself, but now I'm sort of injecting it into them. And now they're supporting that belief and helping me to co-create it as my perspective on it. And that is, like you kind of said earlier, it can be as small as not getting the flu, or as great as, or getting a parking spot, or as great as, the sky's the limit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right about this. It's so possible to raise your immune system, but what you're really talking about on a deeper level is your beliefs shape your attitudes. Your attitudes determine your thoughts and feelings, and your thoughts and feelings determine all your decisions and your choices. And what we're doing essentially is we're gradually shifting our beliefs. And when the beliefs change, all your choices and decisions change too, automatically. So we're creating entirely new possibilities for people to function through.
Yeah. Yeah. And it there seems to be so many people like yourself that are doing so many incredible things. And it always surprises me how little known it is still, and I guess that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I think we'll look back and see, it'll be kind of like a laugh, like, oh my gosh, here, these people that were looked at as crackpots or, whatever by the mainstream really were on the cutting edge, as you put it. So it's going to be very fascinating to see how things unfold in the coming years. And I'm curious with you, and obviously you've been at this a while, do you feel like there's a sort of a quickening happening, a spiritual revolution of sorts where people are waking up in larger and larger numbers?
I think it's happening, but it's not as overt as I would like. I've been doing this work for a little over 40 years now, and I figure any decade now I'm going to be an overnight success. People will know about my work, but for some reason, and I don't understand this at all, but people in their teens, 20s, and 30s who would really like to know about real magic have not been gravitating yet to this real magic that I'm teaching. And I know it's going to happen, but I'm really excited about the possibility of people learning about this stuff. I apologize for the sounds of a garbage truck in the background, but that's just how it works. I'm going to close my window.
Yeah, no worries. Well, what is the best way, Richard, for people to connect with you? People that are interested in learning more or taking some of your workshops, and you do workshops in person as well as online, correct?
I've done them. Mostly we have other teachers teaching because
Gotcha.
The one thing that I've had to do over my lifetime is try to stay connected with the thing that's most inspiring to me. So I go through periods where I'm just teaching like crazy, just on the road, just teaching and teaching. And then I'll go through periods where it's time for me to learn. And now that we have about 1,200 practitioners around the world and over 300 instructors teaching, I'm in a discovery phase. So I'm not really teaching very much right now. But people can go to quantumtouch.com. They can watch our quantum energy system video. They can find instructors to take workshops from. They can get sessions from people out there. They can read the books, Quantum Touch, The Power to Heal, or Quantum Touch 2.0, The New Human, and get started that way. These are all really good avenues. And for those who want to explore the depths of emotional honesty and healing themselves through emotional honesty, the Self-Created Health Workshop, I think, is my most profound work to date, as it walks people through a very simple, direct process to release the emotional causes. So when the energy healing breaks down and doesn't work, we go to a deeper level and find the emotional level underneath it.
Wow, fascinating. Richard, is there any other stories you've shared? Normally at the end, I ask for a synchronicity story or serendipity story, positive paranormal story. You've shared a bunch of great ones already. Is there any others that you would want to share?
There are so many. It's just not the priority. The priority, I think, is people realizing how deep their love is. Because when you go down to that deeper level and you realize in the most sincere part of yourself that what makes you really happy is giving to other people, is loving another human being, is being loved by someone you love, is receiving the love, of being transformed by the love, and then realizing that your love has unbelievable power and impact.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people get caught up like in the whole political system and who's going to be the leader, but they forget that the real power is within yourself and your ability to connect to that deepest, sincere part of the love that you have. And that's the core place where the transformation happens. And the accelerator to all spiritual growth is self-honesty. Yeah. And that's really what the big story is about. And we could talk about amazing synchronicities and magic and healing. I love that stuff. I'm a big fan. But the real deepest healing is where you discover how deep your own love goes.
Absolutely. You know, that's something that I'm very fond of doing, Richard, is sitting in sort of having a meditation session where that is my objective, is just to drum up love within myself and connection. And, you know, you can have some of the most profound, powerful, vibration raising experiences when you start tapping in and consciously reaching out to, you know, intending to open that door up, so to speak. And it just starts to flow through you and you tap into. And so many people think that the love that they're seeking love external of self through another person. And really what the irony there is it's all within you. And I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. I encourage everyone to experiment with that very simple practice of going within and you know, so few people, it's crazy how so few people have ever even considered such a thing. Wow, what if I go within and drum up love vibrations within myself? And it's amazing.
You just hit on it exactly, that you actually took the time or take the time to see how deeply you can feel love.
Yeah.
And whether you're doing a meditation where you're thinking about, I love my cat, or I love the neighbor's child, or I love this work that I'm doing, or I love this person that's dear to me, or my mother, or my child,
or myself.
The self. But you start with things that are easy, and then you bring it back to yourself. That, you see, this, one of the great secrets is that every infant is born loving themselves.
Yeah.
It just takes a lot of bad experiences before you stop doing it.
Yeah.
Now, internally based self-esteem is love you earn from yourself. And that's a little different. That comes from honesty, integrity, self-responsibility, and self-trust as the 4 pillars for building self-love that you earn from yourself. But even if you're not connecting with that self-esteem, you can still tap in to the self-love that is innate. That's who you are. That's how you were born. You were born loving yourself. Every creature loves itself.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use those words, but it's inside there. It's automatic. And you can tap in on that automatic love and then build the earned love from yourself to yourself.
Yeah, and I also love what you said in regards to giving, because so few people realize that's where it's at. I'm a firm believer in the universe will present you with opportunities to give away in some symbolic form what you want for yourself to another. And I had a friend explain it to me, Halcyon, who's a very interesting, inspired individual, and he explained it very well recently. Where he talked about giving and how if I have an exchange with you that's, say, monetary in nature, well, it's sort of a sum zero, because I give you something, you give me something in return, and it cancels each other out, sum zero. But if I'm giving of myself in a way that feels good and not necessarily if someone's begging and you feel really bad, you got to really examine how you feel about it in the moment, but you're wanting to give of self and it feels good to give of self in whatever the scenario is. And I give of myself in service or however I'm giving to another. Now it's a sum too, because I've gained from it and you've gained from it. And really, if someone has observed that act, that kind or good act, it's even more than that, and we know, of course, that chemicals are released in the brain when you witness an act of kindness. So it's a sum, however many people witnessed whatever's happening, if there is, if it is a scenario where there's something to be witnessed. And so I think this is a really interesting way to look at it, sort of scientifically or mathematically, why giving is so profound and empowering to move into a space of how do I serve others? And then you get into the underlying theme of why it all makes sense, and you get back to the oneness of all. It's all extensions of self. So whatever you give of self, you're always giving to self, in a sense. There is no selfless act, so to speak, because every person, everything is an extension of the one that you are part of.
You're hitting on so many really important pieces here. The process of giving actually does something else that you may not have thought about directly. Mm-hmm. We look to say, how do we stay in touch with our own higher self? What is my higher self telling me? And what most people don't realize is the micro moods that we experience are often communications from our own higher self. So when you were giving and you got that good feeling moving through your body going, oh, that feels really good. Even just cleaning up my room might give me a good feeling. But whatever you're doing that is giving you that good feeling, that sincere good feeling inside, that was actually a little nudge or whisper from your own higher consciousness saying, yeah, that's it. Go that way.
Yep.
So when you're giving to somebody, you're actually not just all the other stuff that you were talking about, which is totally true and very well said, but you are also connecting with your higher self, who's giving you a little tap on the shoulder saying, aha, right one. That's good.
Yep. Absolutely, Richard. Well, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I got to say, I love all my interviews, but I really have enjoyed this one tremendously. And, I look forward to when your book, Secret Nature of Matter, comes out. I would love to do a part 2 with you and dig in more to everything that's going on and that you talk about in that book. When is that slated for release?
Don't know yet. I'm negotiating.
When you're done.
I'm still writing it. I've got a few more chapters to go, and then we got to set a publication date. And I may come out with it in Kindle before it comes out as a paperback, but we'll see. I'm just working on that process right now.
Okay, well, keep me posted for sure. And as one final question that I'd like to leave you with, I like to open with one to try and put you on the spot. What would you say is your passion in an elevator, which didn't really put you on the spot at all, and I'm pretty sure this one won't either. But I'm going to try anyway. 60 seconds or less. What is the meaning of life according to Richard Gordon?
The meaning of life is to learn how to have fun.
I like that.
Learning how to have fun and to consciously create reality.
Yeah, absolutely. It's meant to be a joy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this has been a joy indeed, Richard. Thank you again so much for taking the time to connect with me and the audience here. And I look forward to reconnecting with you again in the very near future.
My pleasure. It's real joy for me too. Thank you, Brandon.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes, since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting. Your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.